This is what I also creatively called the Messesh, which I designed as a fusion between a khopesh, very obviously, and a kriegsmesser, with some embellishments like this cobra head style nagel and another snake head there, to stick with the Egyptian theme, and a lion's head. Now this would be more appropriate if it was a lioness in reference to the Egyptian goddess Sekhmet, but lion's heads are pretty common on European swords, and I wanted it to be a fusion of Egyptian and European. So let's see how well it cuts. Yep, nice and clean. Go ahead. This is a bit heavy for quick successive cuts.
It doesn't feel as nimble as it should, I think, because of that extra weight. A little bit steep. A little steep. Oh.
Again, nice and clean. This is going to take quite a bit of velocity to get through without just knocking it over.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Very clean, yeah. Yeah, I don't think I can get another one. It's the upper arm target, this is the forearm target. You want to give that one a try? There you go.
Good sound.
Yeah. Nice. So this is the one with the danger core.
Danger core.
That's the hardwood dowel there that has caused trouble before.
No.
It felt like nothing. That was clean. Normally I struggle with the horizontals. Stop overswinging, you dumbass. Okay. Overswings look better, but like in terms of the result of the tatami, but better. Whoa, that worked better than I expected. Nice.
It's so heavy compared to what I'm used to.
Yes, it is.
Right?
I mean, at least the mass is mostly in the hilt, but still, it's... So why does it cut as well as it does? Some of you may immediately say, because it's so strongly curved. Some folks get really hung up on curvature. That's not the end-all be-all. There are other more important factors. So let's talk a little bit about that. In the previous video, I tested and reviewed this anime sword here. And interestingly, suddenly there are comments about how it doesn't cut so well because of the wavy shape. This is more curved than that. This is like a recursive curve. Shouldn't this cut amazingly well? But then some people argued that, no, it's because this is curved in the wrong direction. Well, depending on where you're hitting, you're absolutely cutting with the correct curve. Either way, the argument is usually that the curvature is what does the trick. That's what makes it slice as it goes through the target. Never mind that straight blades still travel in an arc just by virtue of the way they're swung. So there's still a slicing action, which you can see. Don't get me wrong, depending on the grip technique and the shape of the target, you can achieve a straight chop with minimal slicing movement. But generally, even with a straight blade, the edge will still slide through whatever you're cutting. It's just that a curved blade encourages and exaggerates that slicing action. This would be much more slicey, technical term. But that wasn't the problem. The problem here is the edge grind. Right? If you look at that, and this is what I already improved. Let's take a look at the factory edge. All right, so this is what we have here. I have another example, just to not beat on this one sword too much. This is another one that I've been having a lot of trouble trying to get halfway decent cuts out of. You can probably see why. So it's a little bit difficult to show that on camera, but I'll try to just move it around, give you an idea. That's an awfully steep, thick bevel. Compare that to the Messesh. That's a noticeably shallower angle. If we compare the blade grind, right? So this has a little bit of a hollow grind here. So let's say this is the spine, right? So then you have a little bit of a hollow grind. Then you've got this ridge here. From there, it tapers. You know what? I need to make this larger. Never mind. So spine, hollow grind. All right, now we're here. Now we've got that primary bevel, and then we got a secondary bevel. I made this way too thick, but, right, so exaggerated primary bevel, secondary bevel, right? So these have different angles. This, on the other hand, is double-edged. So you go from the center, right, it's straight, and then boom. So that's the bevel right there. And it's flat here, flat and then steep bevel. Okay, I've exaggerated that again, but you get the point. All right, whereas this here is a little bit more gradual. It goes like this and then like that. And you can see how this tapers a lot more gradually than that. This one here is flat from the spine, then there's a primary bevel, and then you have a secondary bevel at the end there, right? This in and of itself is not a problem necessarily because it's not terribly thick, right? So the problem here is simply that the secondary bevel there needs a shallower angle. Then we have this blade here, which was also difficult to cut with. I did manage a few decent cuts, but it was also difficult for a different reason. If you look at this, the grind is actually pretty good. It goes from the center all the way to the edge, right? So it is nice and smooth. There's not much resistance there, but here's the problem, right? So I'm drawing this a little bit larger so you can see. The problem is not this, this bevel is fine. The problem is the apex of the edge. It's supposed to be like this. So it's just a little dull here, just right at the very end. So that's an easier fix. This is what people are talking about when they say just sharpen it, right? Because here you can do that. Like you just touch up the apex of the edge. You just sharpen the edge itself because the grind is fine. interestingly enough, considering how much of a disaster this thing otherwise is. In case of these two, you can't just touch up the edge, you have to reprofile the whole thing to make it cut. In this case, no need for any of that. The profile is good and the edge is good. Right? So this is why it cuts so well. I mean, that's one of the big reasons, right? That's a very substantial part of the equation. The other part is that the blade is fairly wide, which again ties in with the blade grind overall, because the wider it is, the more space you have to taper it out. Now in this case, they didn't do that. So you can see that's not necessary. There's just one way to do it because it's straight for most of it and then it only tapers from here, right? So you don't need a wider blade in order to accomplish that, although it helps. The sort that I cut with best is this one right here. And if you look at that, it's a wide blade. It's pretty thin too. And then it gradually tapers. It thins out from the center of the blade to the edge. So that results in very little resistance. This will just sail straight through a target. Now there's a downside. A blade like this is a lot more prone to damage than this would be. The shallower the angle of the grind is and the thinner the blade and edge are, the better they cut, but the less durable they are. The more you have a risk of the edge bending over or breaking or chipping or what have you. This is quite a good compromise. This is a strong grind, but as you can see, it still cuts very well. Another thing that helps with it is just the mass. The heavier the blade is, the more it can just push its way through the target, kind of brute force its way through. So there's a whole lot of babbling to just say, this is sharp. Right? But I hope you can understand that there's a little bit more to it. It's not just the sharpness of the edge itself, it's also the angle. It's also the thickness of the blade, the width of the blade, etc., etc. It's a little bit more complicated than just, well, it curved and it's sharp. All right? Thanks for listening. Hope you found it interesting and take care, folks.